Hey everybody, Wayne here. In today's overview review, I'm taking a look at Manila, The Savage Streets, 1945, designed by Michael Rinella and co-published by Revolution Games and Take Aim Designs. Manila's Savage Streets is a solitaire wargame placing you in command of the attacking American 14th Corps, made up of the 1st Cavalry, 37th Infantry, and 11th Airborne, attempting to liberate the capital of the Philippines, Manila, from the defending Japanese forces during the Battle of Manila in February of 1945. This is the second game in the Solitaire Area Movement Series, following on the heels of Stalingrad, Advance to the Volga in 1942. Let's do a quick overview. I have a Turn 1 tutorial playthrough video available for a in-depth look at the game. I'll cover my pros and cons, and then I'll give you my final thoughts. So let's go down to the table. All right, so let's begin the overview, by the way, continuing off from my playthrough. So I'm filming this right after I did my Turn 1 tutorial playthrough. So if you want to see the game really explained and literally the first turn in action with graphics popping up, please check out that video. This will just be a quick overview just to understand my pros, cons, and final thoughts. Okay. So we have the map here of Manila. You have an old style map on the back. You have the areas designated here with these solid black lines. It is an area movement game, right? Area activation, area movement. Each turn, you're going to start off, and the sequence of play is helpfully printed right on the board here. Your job is going to be to capture Intramuros and then 33 other areas. So for a total of 34 areas out of 37, or capture all 37. So capture all 37, it's going to give you a automatic victory. Just capture Intramuros and 33. It's going to give you an operational victory, which is basically where the historical victory was as of the end of the time here. In the game, again, it is area activation. You have stacks of fresh units. You activate fresh units within an area. An area can be activated more than once if there are multiple fresh units available, or at least one fresh unit available, I suppose I should say. And you will then be moving into adjacent areas, conducting combat against static Japanese defenders. Just like in the first game, although if you know how the first game works, there's a few minor changes. I'll cover some of them, some of the changes later. Some changes with combat and kind of combat results. And then the leader system, there's actual leaders, HQ units here in this game that'll add a +1 to the American attack if they're present along with subordinate units. Now, just like in Stalingrad, the first game, you move into an area, you're going to go ahead and reveal that Japanese counter. It's going to have a strength point and it's going to have a special ability behind it. So that special ability is going to be the Japanese defense strategy. So something like you move into an area, you flip a unit. Oh, it's a sniper. So after combat resolution, one of your leader units is going to be placed in the out of action box. Now when it comes to leaders, unlike regular units that cost supply to rebuild, leaders at the end of a turn, you're going to roll a die to determine their injury status. Are they KIA, in which case they are gone for the rest of the game? Are they lightly wounded, in which case you'll put them a turn ahead on the turn track and they'll come back in the next dawn phase? Or are they going to be returning to play immediately? Are you going to continue like that in action rounds, activating groups of units or units however many you want, moving into areas, revealing Japanese defenders, committing available support units that you've purchased with supplies. These support units, artillery and engineer from the base game, provide either +1 or +2 to your attack value. Each side, you're going to add up certain modifiers, certain factors, roll some dice, and see who comes out ahead. When you're rolling, you can have multiple results. Your attack total, if it's less than the defensive total, you're repulsed. You're going to lose your lead unit. It's going to go to that out of action box. The nice thing is in the game is that when units get eliminated, they're eliminated or they're placed in the out of action box. Regardless, the only way a unit is completely removed from the game are the leaders. Otherwise, when they're KIA, otherwise they're all going to go to that out of action box and you're going to be able to spend supplies, or in the case of leaders, again, you're rolling to try to get them back in subsequent turns. Repulsed, like I said, lead unit is removed in place and you have to retreat. You're also going to suffer a hit to your morale. The morale you want to keep on this left track here, so 10 or higher, because it can give you a +1 in your attack value. If you get exactly equal to the defender, it's a stalemate. You're just flipping your units to spent, the defender stays. Success is if you're greater than the defender, They are eliminated, and then all your attacking units are flipped to their spend side. And the overrun is when the difference between the attack total and the defense total is greater than the actual defense factor of the Japanese unit. That's an overrun. Not only are they eliminated, your units remain fresh. They can continue to be activated again in a future action round. That's a difference between the first game, the Stalingrad game. In that one, even with an overrun, your units were still spent. Here, they will stay fresh. However, in this game, the overrun, it only cancels out the effects of the fanatic Japanese defense strategy. In Stalingrad, it actually canceled out the effects of 3 of the 5 different Japanese strategies. Sequence of play, Dawn phase, you start off with reinforcements, maybe withdrawing units, checking for leader mortality. You roll for random events after that. Different random events are going to be things like the Japanese actually do retake an area again, unlike Stalingrad game where it was 100% static. You suffer divisional pause. You should be familiar with that. Civilians and refugees can occur quite a bit. Excuse me. There's 4 numbers when you're rolling a 3d6, so it has the highest likelihood to occur. They are going to hurt you when you have mandatory attacks. The presence of those civilians and refugees, which was a huge part of this battle. We'll talk about that more later. And then, the breakout offensive, again, things that'll either take away units, cause you to temporarily lose units, the presence they're going after the Japanese, or something that's going to cause your units to pause. After the random event phase, you're going to have a supply phase. It's where you roll for supply. Supply you're going to spend, simply put, to either use support units and put them in available support units box to then use in combat, or to try to get units back from the out of action box. I shouldn't say try. If you have the supply and you spend it, you are going to get them back. You're going to go back with their parent unit or from where they started. After the supply phase, and by the way, supplies can be banked from turn to turn. So you can if you roll really poorly, you could just say, okay, I'm not going to do a whole lot of combat and maybe build up your supply points to the next turn. Then it's combat phase. That's where I mentioned having action rounds, activating areas, fresh units, moving them into other areas, fighting the Japanese defenders, or maybe maneuvering them around to attack from different areas. After the combat phase is the end phase. If you haven't won an automatic victory yet, which is where you control all the areas, and it's the end of turn 9, you're going to check for that operational victory, which is where Intramuro, you have to control Intramuros, and along with 33 other areas. Otherwise, you flip all your spent units back to the fresh side, reduce their morale by 1. It's going to keep going down. So at some point you may want to, and you're probably going to have to spend supply to boost it back up. You remove any of those random event markers I talked about, and then you advance the turn marker to the next turn. Again, you continue until it is turn 9. So that is a very quick and dirty overview of the game. It may not have taught you the game, but that's okay. Again, I have a turn 1 tutorial video. It's like half an hour. Should be an easy watch, should be a good watch. Lots of good information in that one. Go ahead and watch that one. Otherwise, you guys should have now a good idea of how this game works. If you've already played Stalingrad Advance to the Volga 1942, you're going to know exactly how this game works with some minor changes, which we'll cover here shortly. So, speaking of which, I think we should go to my pros and cons. As always, cons first. So a small issue I have that I want to mention quickly. Much like with Stalingrad Advance to the Volga, I find the control markers superfluous. The game tells you once you take control of an area by defeating the defending Japanese unit, you place an American control marker, which one of these, in an area. And then you're going to go ahead and modify the control markers here. You have, a 10 and a 1 here. You're going to modify them on the record track and move them up to show, hey, I've now taken control of an additional area. However, by definition, once you eliminate the Japanese unit from an area, that area is now under American control. So every area in the game starts with either American units, which is up here, or down here, or Japanese defenders. There are no neutral areas, no areas that are empty, just waiting to be taken over by the Americans. It's either Japanese or there's Americans. There's no way for it to be otherwise, right? If every area has either Japanese or American unit, once you eliminate that Japanese unit, it is now American controlled. If you have Japanese and Americans in the same area, then it's going to be contested. So, reminder, there are only 2 ways to win, right? You either control every single area, which is an automatic victory, or you earn the operational victory at the end of the game by controlling area 37 and then 33 other, for a total of 34 out of the 37 areas. So I ask you, is it easier to spend all game placing control markers and adjusting the track repeatedly? Or is it easier to just count to 3 once at the end of the game? I firmly believe it's a leftover from the origins of this system, which was a 2-player game where areas could actually be retaken by the opposing side, making who last controlled an area a valid question and something you needed to keep track of. In this game, if there's a Japanese unit in an area, it's controlled by the Japanese. If there isn't, the Americans control it. In the end, it doesn't really matter either way. Just be aware, I feel it's easier and not as fiddly to just not use the control markers. The second thing I want to mention is less of a negative and more of just a wish list item. I wish the game did more to address the realities of the fight over the city of Manila. Number one, of course, being the presence of so many civilians and the heinous civilian casualties that were suffered. Now, the game does have a random event, which occurs quite a bit, and I absolutely appreciate that is included. That's that civilians and refugees random event, which I talked about in my overview. But, as a random event, it only comes into play if it's rolled. And by itself, I'm just not sure if it feels like enough. When we compare the Battle of Manila to the Battle of Stalingrad, while the military casualties pale in comparison, in the Battle over Manila, something like 5 or 6 times as many civilians were killed and wounded. Stalingrad was basically a free-for-all military-wise. In Manila, the Americans, under MacArthur's orders, were constantly striving to limit property damage and harm to innocents up until basically nearly the end of the battle. Related to that, MacArthur put many restrictions on air support and artillery bombardments. Those last 2 things are in the game to a degree, but really as more of optional rules. So what I mean is that the air support, the game comes with counters, but it's an optional rule to have them available after a certain point. Artillery, you can use as much as you want. In reality, you should start off more limited because that was the intent. Again, it opened up later once, a lot of American casualties and it was just having a lot of trouble rooting out the Japanese defenders. He opened things up, but it started off much more limited. They're in the game, but they're kind of optional rules. And I don't know, maybe I'm being nitpicky here, but I'd like to see them part of the core game as they were historically. As wargamers and people who play these conflict simulations, we often forget the human side of the equation. And while this game makes strides, right, I just feel it could do even better. And finally, I do miss some of the details of the combat resolution from the first game. Here's what I mean. As part of combat, one of the results can be an overrun. I talked about in the overview. That's when you dominate the combat and the difference between your attack total and the defender's defense total is greater than the defender's actual combat strength printed on the counter. An overrun keeps your units fresh, which is a change from Stalingrad. And it also cancels out the fanatic Japanese special ability, which are also called the defender strategies. But only that one. And there are 5 defender abilities in the game. In the Stalingrad game, an overrun gave you the ability to cancel out 3 of the 5 defender abilities, not just 1. I miss that. It makes combat resolution feel a little bit more deterministic and random. You flip a defender, you see a sniper or an ambush, that's it. You have no luck mitigation option there. In Stalingrad, you could commit more support units. Once you saw that, you could commit more support units so you could try and save those units, right? Because you wanted to get that overrun to cancel out that special ability. You actually had sort of an option, right? It was a luck mitigation ability. Here, you are completely at the will of that random defense strategy. I don't like taking that choice out of the player's hands. Now it's consolation. As I mentioned, overrun does leave your units fresh. And in Stalingrad, they were spent. So you can theoretically, as kind of a bonus, right? You get to continue to move and make attacks. But if you hit, a sniper or an ambush, now you've lost a leader. You've lost a lead attacking unit. So are you really going to launch another immediate attack with the same group of units, considering how much it hurts you to then also maybe suffer a stalemate or defeat, or be repulsed, If given the choice between those 2 benefits, either having the overrun lead to fresh or having the ability to cancel out more of the Japanese defense strategies, I would take that, in my opinion, more effective overrun and put the option back in the player's hands to try and avoid automatically losing a unit to a defender or suffer one of those other negative effects. Okay, that's it for the cons. On to the pros. First off, once again, the components are excellent quality. Easily tied for the highest quality production from Revolution games I have ever seen, equal to Stalingrad, the first game in the series. The counters are a nice size for the map. The numbers on them are clear, easy to read from a distance. And as for the map, of course, it's mounted. It has a wonderful World War II era map as a background to the play area. It's not only vibrant and easy to read and use, it's functional, with clear areas and easy to reach holding boxes and tracks. The overall presentation is simply fantastic, and kudos to Charles Kibler for a job well done with the artwork and the graphical presentation. Second, and worth its own mention, is adding the attack value, defense value track to the map itself. Why is this so helpful? Well, the design of the combat system has you resolving combat by adding or subtracting up to 5 different modifiers. Then you're rolling 2d6 and coming up with the attack total. You then need to do that, you do that for your attacking Americans, and then again for the defending Japanese. When playing Solitaire, it's asking a lot to people to make calculations and remember all those numbers for each combat. When this was the core of the system, right, was a 2-player game, it made sense. You just calculated your own side, there you go. Being Solitaire and having to do it for both sides, that's where it becomes a burden. So, us players, playing it solo, started getting creative with ways to keep track of the AV and DV separately. In my videos and when I play, I used a D20, which I showed off in my videos for the Stalingrad game. Some players, they use control markers or extra units and they put them on the morale or record track, which the Stalingrad had, right? Other people, like Stuka Joe, created a separate AV-DV track of their own you could print it out and use something on. Thankfully, at the end of the day, we were listened to, and now there's a dedicated track and markers to help with that combat resolution. It seems like a small thing, but it's a big quality of life improvement, and it should be recognized. They listen to the players. Not every designer or publisher does that. Speaking of quality of life, I have multiple items to praise. All of the tracks and information on the board are helpful for playing the game, along with another excellent player aid. Now, I do wish instead of being double-sided, the player aid was printed on 2 separate pieces, as I, along with a lot of other gamers, like to either lay my player aids out on the table, next to the board, or I prop them up with letter holders behind the board. Regardless, I preach that Solitaire game should be designed to keep people's eyes out of the rulebook and on the table. And this series continues to do a great job with that. The rules are not long, basically 8 pages or so. So playing from the player aids and the board very quickly becomes second nature. Speaking of the rules, they're some of the best you'll find in wargaming. Clear, concise, occasionally some odd verbiage. I do recognize some phrases as obvious leftovers from older Area Impulse games that Michael Rinella had designed. But overall, very easy to learn and easy to reference from during gameplay. An excellent rulebook that many other designers and publishers could learn from. And finally, I love the addition of event markers, right? I talk about the events, and they actually each come with a marker, which I have them right here next to the board. Often in Stalingrad, Advance to the Volga, I would roll for a random event that, say, gave a modifier in combat. Then I would completely forget I had rolled that event later in the turn. You're deep in the turn, you're trying to remember all kinds of rules, you're resolving combats, you just forget. With Manila, you have those event markers you can place on the board. You can place it on location, you can place it during my playthrough. I was placing them above the attack defense, the civilians and refugees, to give me a reminder I had the -1 to combat. It's a great mnemonic, and I'm really glad they included them. Which, by the way, that's one reason that when I talk about the control markers, why you make, Wayne, what does it matter there's control markers? I only would worry that the presence of so many control markers on the counter sheet could potentially take away from extra, more useful counters, but again, it seems like there's room. It's because there was some blanks, so I'm sure it's fine there. Besides the event markers, fourth, I love how fast this game plays. Often with hex and counter or area movement games with, counters like this one is, games can drag on. Just the fact you are maneuvering so many separate units in such a big sandbox, it gives the type of feel, right? Can make decision making harder. Also called analysis paralysis, right? You're not sure exactly what to do because you have so many choices. That can drag out gameplay to the point it's not as fun. That's not the case here. Well, you do have plenty of decisions to make. You can often make them quickly. Combined with the fast combat resolution, the turns, they tend to fly by once you're in a game. In fact, the longest turn is probably the first turn. And that's just because all of your forces are at their strongest, they're all on their fresh side, and you're likely attacking with everyone or close to everyone. Starting with turn 2, you now have to worry about your supplies, available combat units, bringing units back from the out of action box. Do you have any injured leaders you may be waiting for to come back? Did you roll poorly for supplies? The first turn you have a minimum amount. Later on, whatever you roll, that's what you roll for supplies. 5th, the gameplay itself. It continues to be so simple, easy, yet full of flavor and depth. Planning your moves and attacks, knowing in advance what terrain is in an area, right? Is it clear, urban, fort? You kind of have a general idea of what the strength is going to be. But you don't know exactly what defender you're going to encounter until you move into that area, you flip that counter over, and it's revealed. It's kind of thrilling. And while the Americans, you have a decent amount of supplies and resources, right? I mean, you're the one who's on the offensive. You have that advantage, right? You'll never truly feel like you have enough. And you'll have to manage your artillery and engineer combat support wisely. Like the first game, the combat in Manila has a push your luck feel to it. With the limited amount of supplies, you will find yourself in situations where you can't provide enough combat support to guarantee a win. So, do you engage in riskier combat, with the payoff being that you are one area closer to that victory? Or do you wait until maybe the next turn when you have more supplies, then launch a stronger attack? With the downside of that, waiting being your offensive was delayed, and now in the end, you only have 9 turns to get that operational victory. Delay too often, you're going to run out of time. Historically, the battle may never have been in doubt, but you as the player, you still have goals and a time limit. The game makes you feel them every turn, and most games come down to the wire. It's rare to have a runaway victory or an obvious loss with this system, something shared by the earlier Stalingrad game. Kudos to Michael Rinella and his team for crafting another tight design. All right, that's it for my pros and cons. Let's end with my final thoughts. Manila, the Savage Streets, 1945, continues Michael Rinella's Solitaire Area Movement Series in style, with another engaging, replayable design that lives up to the first game in the series. Is it different enough that you need to own both games in the series? That's a question only you can truly answer, because it won't be about the differences, but rather the experiences. Did you enjoy the system of Stalingrad? Did you like those choices and flavor it brought, but also appreciated the simplicity? Then you'll enjoy Manila. Did you find the static defenders of Stalingrad lacking? Well, that hasn't changed here with one exception, right? There is the event that allowed the Japanese to retake an area and force the Americans into retreat. A welcome addition to the game, although it was a random event, it's not guaranteed to occur, and it doesn't, flip the system on its head. Funny enough, however, this game is actually more historically accurate in that regard. Unlike in Stalingrad, where the Russians routinely engaged in strong counterattacks and retook areas from the Germans, the Japanese were much more static in Manila. The reality is, the Japanese troops in Manila were out of their element. They were naval troops, Marines, who didn't have the same infantry, urban training as the army did, and were basically told to hold a position, fortify it, and wait to die. So thematically, I think this system works even better here to accurately simulate history. At the end of the day, Manila, the Savage Streets is worthy of any solitaire wargamers collection. It doesn't wow quite as much as Stalingrad Advance to the Volga did, as it's just a little too familiar for that. But sometimes, playing a game system you are already comfortable with that showcases a new setting and encourages us to learn more about history is exactly what you want. I know this one works for me. Now, if you'd like to learn more about the Battle of Manila and the history around it, I can recommend Rampage, MacArthur, Yamashita, and the Battle of Manila by James Scott. I picked up the audiobook, and it has really kept my attention. Just be aware going in, it is not an easy read or listen, as it doesn't just focus on the battle or on the militaries. The author talks a lot about the civilian suffering and atrocities committed by the Japanese soldiers, both during the occupation of the Philippines and then for the Battle of Manila. But overall, I think the book makes a great companion to this game. Thank you to everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know what you think of my video and this game in the comments below. And until next time, everyone, later.